Inside the gut, how microbiome science is shaping product development. My name is indeed Isabel Hullings. I'm the Executive Director at ILSI Europe. ILSI Europe is a platform that provides you with high quality science, best practices, tools to really make sure that you have the scientific credibility behind ingredients, foods, but also regarding food safety and sustainability. Over the past decades, the gut microbiome has went from a small niche, very specific, to the most spoke about topic really in the frontiers of nutrition and health. And we're no longer thinking of just the bacteria and the nutrients, but it's really a whole ecosystem inside our body. And whatever we eat shapes us not only from digestion and immunity, but it now all the way goes with a gut-brain axis to mental well-being even. But at the same time, there's a paradox. Because on one hand, we have so much nutrition science. We already know for hundreds of years that the bacteria giving a beneficial effect in the fermentation. But now we have a whole explosion of biotics, postbiotics, prebiotics, and so on. And on the other hand, in the real world behavior, what we see is that people, the general audience, is not even meeting the basics. There's a huge fiber gap. People are not meeting the daily requirements for fibers, which is actually a cornerstone for a healthy human microbiome, even if we don't know yet what a healthy microbiome is. So this comes to the questions, how can we bridge this gap from cutting edge science that we all know to really real day consumer behavior? And how does this mean for product development and opportunities? So basically, to uncover this question together, unpack it, I'm really pleased to be here, to be together with Alex Glover from Holland & Barrett. Please, Alex, introduce yourself for the audience.
Thanks, Isabel. So hi, everyone. I'm Alex Glover. I work with Holland & Barrett, so I'm the formulation lead. So I work across all of our own label product formulations globally, across all of the different customer missions. So that'd be gut health, active nutrition, beauty from within. My background is nutrition science, so I'm a registered nutritionist in the UK, and I've been working in the industry for product development for almost the last 10 years. So really happy to be here and talk all about gut microbiome science and how that kind of really is changing the way we look at developing products in this space.
Yeah. So today in this chat between us, we will explore the current challenges, emerging science, and also where the opportunities lie. So going from closing the fiber gap to really the rise on postbiotics. And also we'll be talking about a little bit the promise of this personalized nutrition, which we have been talking about for the last decades. So let's dive in, and we'll first start with this fiber gap. As I mentioned, in across populations, actually, we see that there's really this significant gap between the recommended daily intake from fibers. And of course, if there's lack of fibers, this immediately impacts microbiome diversity, resilience, and so on. So from your perspective, Alex, how big is this gap really in practice, and how can actually products help to cover it?
I think from a nutritional perspective, it's one of the largest gaps we see at a population level. I think a lot of the industry over the last 5 to 10 years has been very obsessed with proteinifying everything. And actually, even in younger people, the benefit of increasing fiber intake is much more profound from an evidence perspective versus increasing protein. We see across the continent between about 70 and actually up to 96% of the population don't meet that 30-gram recommendation. And actually, that's based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So for men, that probably should be slightly higher. And if you're on a higher calorie intake, it should be matched to your calorie intake. And we know that fiber across a huge array of heart health, brain health, weight management even, there's such a connection between fiber intake and positive health outcomes as an independent variable. So for cholesterol management, it's an independent variable to reduce and bind to that cholesterol. But I think historically, fiber has been seen as, certainly from when I was a child, my grandmother would give me bran, and that was fiber. It was take some bran flakes, sprinkle it over your porridge, and you're fine. But actually, like you've said, there are so many hundreds of different types of fibers that all have very different impacts on different types of bacteria within the gut, whether that be inulins, pectins, phosses, guar gums. There's so many types of fibers we can formulate with that all have very different outcomes. And I think it's really important when we're formulating products to be very conscious of loading of fiber, because the population intake is so low on average. And actually, to deliver the health claim for something like inulin, for example, the claim is 12 grams of inulin in a single dose. I don't know if anybody's ever tried that. It's probably not recommended because it's a highly fermentable fiber. And actually, so we need to be really careful when we're dosing and formulating these products from a customer attrition perspective. Somebody takes a product that you've dosed with 12 grams of inulin, you might be meeting the health claim, but actually the customer experience is going to be largely pretty miserable with that. And I think it's, for me, is really about looking at which fibers impact which areas of the gut, whether that be increasing bifidobacteria, increasing stool frequency, IBS symptoms and things like that, and really being mindful of the types of fibers and the amounts of fibers we're using within supplements, but also in functional foods, because fiber should be coming from whole food sources predominantly, in terms of because it's then contained within the fiber matrix of the food. You get things like polyphenols, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I think there are lots of innovative fibers I've seen around the show today: corn, guar gum, acacias, chicory, kiwi. I'm sure people have seen the kiwis walking around. But yeah, some really interesting research coming around in the prebiotic space as well. So talk a lot about prebiotics, but also soluble and insoluble fibers and the different ways that they can be used across different customer missions, whether that's heart health, brain health. Even we're seeing a lot of impact now with the gut-brain axis and the fiber connection. There's actually some really interesting research with inulin and improving cognitive function in older people because of its impact on bifidobacterium. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity here within fiber. And I was recently in Expo West in March, and actually most of the innovation coming in California and the West Coast is actually in fiber and novel ways to deliver fiber: gummies, stick packs, drinks, so many fiber sodas that I saw across the US as well. Just again, helping consumers not associate it with bran and boring. And actually it's now becoming, in Holland & Barrett, we're kind of considering it the new protein. So fiber is the new protein, which from a science perspective, I love, because we should all be consuming more fiber, and protein, probably not. But yeah, it's a great space.
It's really relevant that you mentioned the different types of fibers. You mentioned already those to prioritize. I wonder, as a dietitian and scientist, I'm wondering, if we are going to offer this to the consumers, are they really going to understand it? There's a behavioral change, but we know that education isn't really working. How do you see that? Maybe it's product innovation. Of course, we're offering them more healthy nutrition, the choices. Any suggestion on that?
I think communication in the fiber space, particularly in Europe, is very challenging because of the doses required to hit the claims. So there's a lot of approved health claims in the fiber space for oats, rye, wheat, chicory, inulin, etc. But the doses are usually quite prohibitively high to create a good formulation for a consumer experience. So from my perspective, and again, there's no approved claims for some of the nice novel ingredients that we've got, but that have actually got a really good level of science behind them. So from my perspective, it's being tactical with your formulation development. If you want to position a product as a gut health product and it's fiber led, you can either look to try and meet one of those one of the approved claims, or adding something like calcium to the product so you're compliant from a kind of labeling perspective, and then do a deep dive from if you're selling it in stores, at point of sale, online, social media channels, about the benefits of fiber. A really good example I've seen recently is a brand called Loam. It's a startup brand in the UK from a TikTok doctor. It's a really nice formulation, but they have a really great landing page about the benefits of the different types of fibers they've included and why. And I think that's a really good example of how to communicate in a space where claims are extremely limited.
Yeah, I tend to agree. We need to really, from the scientific perspective, translate it in a really nice way in the right channels, such as TikTok. We should provide the right evidence there as well. Moving to the second question or section of our conversation here is more on the mechanisms. So we have moved in general of a space of where we are focused on probiotic conversation now to the whole ecosystem. So we see really an uprise of now postbiotics as well. So how do you see this relative role of the three different categories, pre, pro, postbiotics, for product development?
It's an enormous question. I think certainly the way I try and break it down for consumers is that actually fiber should be your base. And that is something that we should all be consuming more of every day. And then the pro and the postbiotics, for me, layer on top of that as a need state specific. So when you've got different, there's lots of good evidence for certain strains of probiotic. Very important, obviously, strain specific. It needs to be genome level, strain specific for that benefit. And then postbiotics, obviously, a much newer kind of addition to the category, but some really cool research, actually, especially from a formulation perspective, because we can put them in gummies, we can put them in chews, they're stable in liquid, but actually even some really cool research showing that a heat inactivated strain of the same species actually has a better benefit in terms of, certainly from an immunomodulatory perspective. Some really cool research coming around postbiotics and how, because They still maintain those MMAPs, microbial-associated molecular patterns. Because they're heat inactivated, they contain heat shock proteins, and some really interesting kind of mechanistic ways in which these postbiotics are actually having a kind of more superior effect, especially from an immune perspective versus the probiotic. But certainly from a product architecture perspective, I would always say that your fibers, whether that's pre or insoluble, is the base. Daily fiber, for example, whether that's stick packs, gummies, you can, but the dosing is a bit lower. And then need state specific. So whether that's for, traveling is a very popular space for probiotics. There's lots of good evidence for travelers' diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea. And then moving into the more niche areas where the evidence is getting there, but not quite at the kind of top level, like the gut-brain axis, the gut-skin axis. That's some really cool strains in this space, looking at some AD, so atopic dermatitis, and some of the kind of more beauty aspects of the gut-skin axis. And then the gut immune axis as well. That's probably one of the better ones, actually, is the gut immune axis, mainly looking at like upper respiratory tract infection, reduction in risk, and things like that. But for me, the probiotics and the postbiotics sit very much in that need state, and the fiber is very much foundational. So your prebiotics come at the bottom, and then the post and the probiotics are layered on top for very specific need states.
Yeah. So and postbiotics is gaining momentum because, of course, they are more stable, targeted solutions. So what new opportunities do they unlock, according to you, in terms of efficiency, formulation, regulatory positioning as well?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest benefit of a postbiotic is certainly formulation flexibility and overage. You don't have to put in 200% overage to achieve a 24-month shelf life like you do with a lactobacillus that's live or a bifidobacterium that's live. A postbiotic is very stable in heat. Like we've even got some research in gummies. It's absolutely fine in gummies. It can withstand the heating process of a gummy. I've seen them in strips today, like tongue strips, like a 50 milligram input. And again, the evidence is growing. There seems to be a lot more evidence coming out from these suppliers investing in the research for, so they might have the same strain. So a good example is like a Plantarum 299V, for example. Very popular live bacteria, but the heat inactivated strain has got growing research. But I think the biggest thing that I want to be cautious of in the industry is that what we need to make sure of is that one heat inactivated strain is not the same as another one. The processing and the way that strain is inactivated through heat at the moment is not standardized. So you could have two identical strains, postbiotics, but they could have different heat inactivation processes, which could actually lead to completely different biological effects. So that's the biggest thing from a postbiotic that I'm really making sure, from a quality perspective when we're formulating, that the way that that product has been heat inactivated and that ingredient is consistent with the research that demonstrates the effect. So you can't just take a generic postbiotic that hasn't been researched because you don't know how it's been treated. And that treatment process is so important because it completely changes the way that that postbiotic interacts with your immune system, with the epithelial cells within your gut. So that's the big thing I'm looking at in postbiotics at the moment, is the quality of how they're processing them.
Yeah, tend to agree totally with, you need to really look at the strain as well. So also when you look at the science, you can't just extrapolate any findings from one study to another.
Nope.
And hence why actually at ILSA Europe, together with some industry experts and academia, we have developed a tool where when you want to design a study or interpret a study, you should look at specific elements from the study. So really characterize the strain, look at the different reporting. So that's a really decision tree for anybody who wants to either design a clinical trial, but also wants to interpret it, use that tool to really guide it. It's really soon published. And regarding postbiotics, there's still a lot of questions as well. There is really a boom in information. But for instance, we are going to have in September a workshop specifically on what if you want to add postbiotics to infant formula, for example. What does it mean? Are also scientists, general pediatricians, are they really recommending that already or not? So we have this bringing these experts with different expertise together and discussing what are still the challenges there, the knowledge gaps as well. So that is a workshop that we will be organizing in this space to cover it with science. Now, let's deepen a little bit more into functional ingredients. Of course, at this conference, we see a lot of different polyphenols being there, and we already know that they have a lot of potential benefits there. They also interact with our gut microbiome, but often their bioavailability is very limited. So from a product development standpoint, how can we better optimize this, actually, the absorption and the effectiveness of polyphenols?
This is a huge question, and I think certainly one of the more exciting areas to leverage the gut in terms of other areas of the consumer journey, whether that's be through immunity, active nutrition, etc. Because polyphenols usually have a pretty low oral bioavailability. I think the best example to use from a research and evidence-based perspective is soy. And actually the daidzein within soy, so one of the predominant isoflavones within soy, has a very poor oral bioavailability. But actually what we need to do is convert that daidzein into equol. And equol has the much more beneficial effects in terms of the affinity to estrogen receptor B, and that is linked with the health benefits. And the reason we see a disconnect in the research in Asian populations and Western populations is because of the historical consumption of soy. The microbiome patterns of those people in the Asian continent is much more efficient at metabolizing the daidzein into the equol. So actually what we know is that the lactobacillus species and taxon is extremely relevant in converting that daidzein into equol. And we see that especially in Japanese populations and Chinese populations, where that consumption of soy is much higher, that you have a much better conversion. And actually equol is about 100 times more bioavailable than daidzein, and it's the bacteria that are facilitating that connection. That's probably the best evidence-based example, but there are I could probably talk about it for the entire session. Pomegranate, again, the punicalagins within pomegranate, they are converted into urolithin A, and that's a fermentation process. And again, most people will actually convert the punicalagins into urolithin B, which doesn't have the biological activity of urolithin A, which supports mitophagy, mitochondrial health. And again, we're looking at the types of bacteria that are fermenting and breaking down those mother polyphenols into their active components, and actually at a population level very low. So from a formulation perspective, we can look at, if we're dosing high levels of polyphenol, which bacteria have been shown to increase the absorption of that. So it's really a bioavailability thing. Resveratrol is another good example where the cell culture research is amazing. It's like the elixir of life, but the research doesn't really translate when you look at resveratrol in human studies, because it doesn't have the same effect, because the majority of the active components of resveratrol need to be fermented into dihydroresveratrol, which again, from a bacterial perspective in the gut, most people don't have that diversity and propensity of bacteria to really activate it. So for me, it's really about picturing the microbiome as the activator of the polyphenols, and it's really, really important. There are so many examples of this within the industry. I think what's another really good one? Soy, pomegranate, resveratrol, curcumin to a degree as well, in terms of dimethylcurcumin. Again, needs to be fermented by predominantly Streptococcus bacteria within the gut, which a lot of us in the West are lacking. So yeah, really interesting in terms of how we can leverage fiber from a bioavailability perspective. Typically, we think of piperine or black pepper as the bioavailability enhancer, liposomes everywhere in terms of bioavailability. But I'm really interested in, from an evidence-based perspective, how we can change the microbiome over time with the delivery of polyphenols to really get the most out of them.
Yeah, true. It's the microbiome itself that's transformed already the polyphenols. And hearing to you, I'm already reminded, for us scientists and being familiar in this space, it's already complex. How do consumers really understand this level of complexity? And should we change the narrative, or are they not getting lost in all this space?
100%. I certainly wouldn't sit in front of consumers and say what I've just said to you, because they'd probably be lost at the word daidzein, for example. For me, it's really about helping the consumer understand the purpose of every ingredient within the formulation. I, as a formulation scientist, hate the kitchen sink approach of just, this formulation has 90 ingredients. For me, I'm more about substance over style. And actually, if an ingredient is in there, there's some really great examples of beauty brands actually that do a really good job of this, of having a really simple ingredient deck and saying, this is a moisturizer, this is a SPF, etc. I think we can do a much better job of, in simple terms, explaining why an ingredient is there. Obviously, it's easier with ingredients that have approved claims because we can quite literally say it. But if we're formulating a fiber product, for example, and you've got partially hydrogenized guar gum, which to a customer means nothing. Oh, actually, this is just a natural fiber found in this, and it may help with this bacteria, or pectin, apples, kiwis, just helping the consumer, because most consumers aren't scientists, and I think sometimes I'm guilty of this as well, getting lost in the great science. But actually, we're developing products for people who largely don't have that background, and they're relying on us as developers, manufacturers, to help them understand why they're giving us their money to take their product. So for me, it's really about how the product shows up. And there's some, again, fantastic examples of newer brands in the space being very clear on benefit outcome. I think that's really the key there from a repeat purchase perspective is, does the benefit you're claiming translate into a relevant outcome? The last presentation was great because it focused a lot on outcomes. And I think we can do the same in the gut space in terms of outcomes. What will you feel? A customer is taking a product. What will I feel from taking this product? And another big one is, how long is it going to take me to feel these results? Again, hugely popular in the States in terms of works within 2 hours, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. I think that's really important for a buyback and buy-in perspective, is to help the consumer understand when and what they're going to feel.
Yeah. Buy-in, also consumer trust, because of course, if they buy it and they don't see the effect of long experiences, you're going to lose them. It's bad for the brand and so on. So I would again say, before launching a product development or focusing on a certain ingredient, definitely look, is the science there? Is there an because otherwise the scientific credibility of your brand will be lost. But that's definitely important, and a clear narrative. Yeah, that's what I'll take from your message here. Continuing this talk on a little bit more, expanding to personalization is also something that we nowadays see a lot in every terms of the way. So, and this is also personalized nutrition based on the microbiome has been really a major promise over the last years. Big investments has been done over decades, but how close are we really today to delivering truly actionable and science-based personalization at a scale? What is your opinion on this, Alex?
To be honest, I think we're quite far away in terms of N equals 1, because again, no gut is the same, no microbiome is the same. It's like a fingerprint. You could have two vastly different taxonomies in two people, and they're both perfectly healthy. So we do know, obviously, that there's lots of evidence for certain phylers. If we have lots of bifidobacterium, we know that's probably a good thing from a majority of different health aspects. So I try and focus more on the broader research in terms of which phylers and which taxonomies have been associated with benefit and what those benefits are, whether that's bifidobacterium, F-prau, butyrate, short-chain fatty acids. And again, I really am trying to focus on outcomes, because you can go and do an expensive microbiome test, which the science is growing there, and it probably is relevant if you've got the money to do that, whereas most consumers probably don't, and they want to have a supplement or a product that is largely evidence-based from a much larger cohort, because not everybody can go and do a stool microbiome sample test and tell exactly what your gut's made up of. But we do know from a broadly evidence-based perspective that the more types of plants you eat is probably going to be better. The American Microbiome Association study showed that 30 a week, which really isn't a lot, 30 different plants a week, and that's like seeds, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, they all count, and 30 a week. We as a brand launched it on all of our food products. There's plant points on there to help consumers with that, because it showed a much greater alpha diversity in the more types of different plants you're consuming. And I think that's what I try and focus on as a nutrition scientist, is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few in terms of a research perspective, and looking at what's been shown at a much larger population level. Because I'd love your insights on this. We still don't know what a perfect microbiome is. And I don't think we will ever get to a consensus of blood pressure under one. We have for blood pressure, cholesterol, we know what's good for everyone, but actually from a gut health perspective, we're not there yet. And I'm not sure if we ever will be, because of the uniqueness of everybody's gut.
Yeah, it's true. We're not there yet on a scientific level. There's still no consensus really on it. We see the microbiome transitioning very quickly, but then also restoring very fast.
Yep.
And on the personalized nutrition, I prefer to call it cluster A. Stratified nutrition, because we are not at a personal level yet. Even in terms of scientific tools, we're now looking at these omics, what you have heard of, is really complex. They're mostly also associations and not causalities. It's not because you eat one thing that this is going to happen. And that's really difficult to understand for the general audience, that it's associations and not really one causes the other one. So I think it's really still far. And here I think we should think of also of the consumer and general public safeties. If we really want to implement personalized or even stratified nutrition, there's still a huge amount of barriers to overcome. And actually we had at ILSI a workshop with this, where we gathered people with different disciplines, going from actually dietitians, healthcare practitioners, regulatory people as well, industry experts, academia, and where we discuss, okay, what are the different types of approaches to really personalize, assess a personal variability between different people, and then addressing it. And then talking about what are the barriers to really translate this wonderful science to really implement it. And now we're thinking, okay, for a company, you can't really orient your product, one product line to a certain niche type of cluster. That's financially and operational not relevant, but there are other ethics barriers as well, where we think of ethics, for example, on data privacy, because you have to have a lot of information to personalize, because it's not only about taking a small sample, but it's the whole lifestyle of the person as well. About fairness, are we then also going to just a small amount of people? Really, do we want to orient it and then making it something for the rich? Which is also not really in terms of ethics, really, and equity, really important. But also think about the digital infrastructure we need, because now we're thinking of gathering massive amount of information from people. Where are we going to store this information? How to analyze it? But then I'm thinking on research aspects, but also from a commercial aspect. Also, if you want to offer a service to consumers on, like, we're going to sell you something personalized, you need massive amount of data to gather that data, analyze it, really extract key learnings for that person specifically. So there's still a huge amount of barriers. And I didn't even start talking about regulatory aspects and barriers also on how to translate this science into that. And we had different expert groups looking at it because we also now see products going, instead of microbiome, also for glycemic control and glycemic index, for example. So more the tools on there, but it's the same for personalized nutrition based on your microbiome. And they're actually an expert group. They made a projection of how our healthcare system should look like. Imagine if you would move all to personalized services, you would have to send all the different steps you would have to take and change our healthcare system, because there's also a cost related to this if we really want to offer this. That was really an interesting perspective. So I tend to agree with you. There's a lot of promise. We're not there yet, and still need a lot of amount of things to cover here. From the audience, actually, what are the others' perspectives? Do you see other problems that we have in translating all this promising science from personalized nutrition to more an implementation side? Or is anybody already really offering some personalized nutrition advice to people? Because there's a chat between us here, but happy to jump in if you have any other comments to add to it. Not
I think
any
the only
hands?
Oh, there's one.
Yeah, we have there somebody. Please add to the conversation.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're selling direct to consumers with a postbiotic that's oat-based and oat fermentation. But what we do offer is personalization when it comes to the dosage. So they can start on a smaller dose, and then we empower the consumer to increase if they're not getting any results from a smaller dose. And the formulation or the product itself doesn't have like an upper limit, whereas many probiotics, for example, do, that you have quite a low daily dose that you take. But our products enable the consumer to increase that dose to quite a high amount. So it can range from starting at 0.5 grams up to 75 grams. And that's, for me, that's really personalized nutrition. But it's has a lot to do with empowering the consumers and to have a really close relationship with them, and to give feedback and help them on the journey. So it's combined in my world.
I think that's a really good example of where personalization doesn't have to be a dietitian sitting across a table from one person and saying, this is exactly what you need. I think that's a really good example of a formulation strategy to help the person understand what personalized is for them. It might be the dosing. Pre-workout's a good example with caffeine. 1 to 2 scoops. 1 scoop for somebody who doesn't want 200 milligrams of caffeine. And for me, that's personalization. It's saying, take this much if you want this result, and take this much as a maintenance dose or this result.
Exactly.
So personalization does not have to be a microbiome stool sample test, a one-on-one consultation with a dietitian. It can be very cleverly done from a labeling, like you've said, or product development perspective.
And then I think the big challenge is to have the consumer understand that in the first step. So even if you start with a smaller dose and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean necessarily that it doesn't work for you. It just means that you need to continue trying in different ways and other dosages. So.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for taking the microphone and giving an example. Really, thank you for your contribution. Anybody else who wants to contribute? No, at this stage. Okay, we'll continue the chat, and we're coming also closer to an end. And now I'm going to challenge you a little bit to look into the future, because I guess when we had 10 years ago this conference or this trade show, we wouldn't have had all of this knowledge here. So let's fast forward, and we're imagine ourselves here in 10 years' time. What do you think we would be talking about in the microbiome-driven product development, and what are we maybe still getting wrong in this space? Yeah.
I think from my perspective, certainly in the next 10 years, we're going to see much more effective ways to map the microbiome on a genome level. So we're going to get a lot more granular detail in terms of different taxonomies, different species, strains, and how they interact with different systems. We're really just starting to understand all of the different axes within the body. The gut-lung axis was only discovered, I think, through the COVID pandemic, that actually there's an interaction with the lungs and the microbiome. So there is so much that we've either just discovered or are just learning about. So I think there's going to be a huge amount of research done in all of these axes and understanding how different microbial species work throughout different tissues in the body, and the kind of cross-functional talking that they're doing to each other. We know, I'm sure everybody, the gut-brain axis is probably the most commonly talked about one. But again, a deepening of the research in strain-specific detail and outcomes is something I'm really looking at, because at the moment we have evidence, but not high standard of evidence for a lot of different things. A lot of the research, especially on some of the, even in some of the more research strains, is like secondary outcomes, or the effect is only seen through a post-hoc analysis. So it's not like rock solid data for the majority of probiotic strains, I would say. So I think genome level understanding, certainly in the next 10 years. And I obviously can't not mention AI. What AI will be able to do in terms of transforming the category, in terms of understanding efficiencies, in terms of data collection. But again, data collection is another big one. More people are caring about the microbiome and gut health. So we're just getting more data from more people. And I think it's really important, especially when we're selling products globally, that a probiotic or a prebiotic complex for a European consumer is not going to have the same impact for somebody in North America or somebody in Asia, because the microbiome makeup, the dietary pattern is completely different. So I think that's a really important consideration if you're selling your product globally in this space, is that especially a probiotic and prebiotic complex is not going to have the same impact on consumers throughout the world. A good question at the front?
Yes, indeed. Please do add to this vision if you want. Thank you already for... is there a microphone for the gentleman here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you already, Alex, for your vision. Curious to hear. Feel free to think about your vision while we listen to the gentleman here.
Maybe just to chime in from what you said and your question. In the next 10 years, I think we have to find a way to solve the issue of the microbiome that comes out, which we can genomically define, and the microbiome that stays in ourselves, because that may have an even more important function, and there may be a relationship with what comes out, but what stays in protects us. Yeah? So here, beyond biopsies, maybe AI will find a solution, but the metabolome will be an issue, helpful as well, probably. But that's, I think, will be the one key aspect, apart from what you just mentioned. Our microbiomes, even in one region, are not the same. If you go to another geographical region, it's even more different. Huh?
Yeah.
Totally, yes, absolutely. Good points. Indeed, the microbiome, the different gut areas and the intestines are not the same. So do we have more visionaries here in the audience? Ooh! Who else has a vision about where are we going to be in the next 5 to 10 years time? Who has anything to contribute to that? I'm sure you all have some ideas there. Yeah, I believe.
What about you? What do you think in the next 10 years?
Yeah, indeed. Fair to bounce the question back. I also believe the mapping of the microbiome will give us. We have already an image that the microbiome is really central to our health, way more than it was. Like we think about our before it was we thought of our immune system like the central place, but it's really moving to the microbiome, and I'm sure that we will discover more that there's links between all the different organs system in our health. So I'm really curious to see how industry will react to that, but also how scientists are gonna unravel this complexity of the whole system that is going to be. So yeah, who knows where we're going to be in 10 years time for that. But coming to an end, and if there's no one of the visionaries here in the room who want to share more thoughts of this, Alex, I'm going to really thank you for this chat today, and we'll see each other in any other opportunity here. Thank you so much.